From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, a former Prime Minister of Israel has told LBC Benjamin Netanyahu has completely lost the trust of the country and cannot win against Hamas. Yesterday, Israel experienced its worst single day for the loss of military life since the recent conflict started. 24 soldiers were killed in ground fighting against Hamas. Liran Berman is the older brother of 26-year-old twins who were among those kidnapped on October the 7th. Speaking to LBC, he has this message for the Israeli Prime Minister.
I hope that he goes to sleep with my brother's pictures in his mind and he wake up to them every morning. I hope that he's doing whatever he can. We need a deal of the hostages because we saw that the last deal was the only option to get hostages back alive. I don't want to be in the decision-making shoes. I know that they don't want to be in my shoes right now. I just know that I want my brothers back by any means necessary. I need them with me.
An Israeli lawyer representing the families of hostages held by Hamas in Gaza has told LBC the UK could help them by putting pressure on Qatar. Kalev Myers, who leads the Voice for Freedom coalition, has told Iain Dale when it comes to the release, the Qatari government is essentially holding the cards.
They give about £350 million every year to Hamas. And 2 weeks ago, they declared that, again, they would renew this in 2024. It's not a secret. So it's a massive amount of money. And they're hosting all the top three senior leaders of Hamas in Doha as we speak. And they have complete leverage over Hamas. We know that if Qatar wants the hostages to be released, they'll be released tomorrow.
The Independent Office of Police Conduct is investigating Norfolk Police following the deaths of 4 people near Norwich. An emergency call had been made from the house in Cossey on Friday morning, but officers were not sent there until a member of the public raised the alarm. The bodies of a man, woman and 2 children were later found. Police are not looking for anyone else. The World Health Organization says there's been an almost 45-fold rise in measles cases across Europe. It says the continent is seeing an alarming rise in the spread of the disease, which has also accelerated in recent months. More than 42,000 cases were reported in 2023, compared to 941 in 2022. Dr. Bharat Pakania is a clinical epidemiologist.
It's a very big issue because measles is absolutely misery. It makes the child extremely unwell, and then some of them will get hospitalized, and some of them will have subsequent bacterial infections like pneumonia. So it really is utter misery.
And there's a new amber weather warning for Scotland as Storm Jocelyn sweeps the UK. All trains have been cancelled for the rest of the night and likely much of tomorrow morning. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 1 point at 74.85. The pound buys $1.26 and euro 16. LBC weather, a windy night with rain clearing in the southeast. Blustery showers in the northwest. These will be heavy and thundery in Scotland with lows of 5. Cloudy with showers in Scotland tomorrow, mostly bright elsewhere with the odd shower in Northern Ireland and some patchy rain in the south, a high of 12. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Charlotte Morgan.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening and welcome to Tuesday's Cross Question. I'm Iain Dale. I'm not sure this hour is going to be quite as emotional as the last one, but you never know. It depends on your questions. The number to call if you'd like to put a question to our esteemed panel is 0345 6060 973. Joining me on the panel tonight, to my right, Anne McElvoy, Executive Editor and Head of Audio for Politico Europe. She hosts the Power Play podcast. Sarah Champion is Labour MP for Rotherham and chairs the International Development Select Committee. Tobias Ellwood, to my far left, is the Conservative MP for Bournemouth East, who's a former Defence Minister and former British Army officer. And to my far right, which is ironic, really, because it's John Stevens, Political Editor of the Daily Mirror. They are here, as I say, to take your calls. Lots and lots of different things in the news that you can call in about tonight. I won't lead you down a garden path. You call in on whatever you like, because Tobias Ellwood, disgracefully a moment ago, alleged that I must know what all the calls are going to be. I have no clue. How would I? But we'll come to them in just a moment.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, our first caller is Jeff in Woking. Hello, Jeff.
Oh, hello, Iain. Yes, at the weekend, our Defence Secretary said that, in his view, the Houthi terrorists in the Red Sea area were attacking ships indiscriminately, not just the ships that are heading to Israel. So my question to the panel is, if that is the case, should there be a more international visual and vocal response, not just Britain and America?
That's a really good question, actually, because people are saying, well, why should it be Britain and America that deal? I mean, there are other countries involved on the periphery of these airstrikes. But Tobias Ellwood, let's come to you.
Yeah, important question to explain how what's going on in the Middle East affects us in the UK, because we can step forward, quite rightly, in my view, to control international or support the international rules-based order. But in this case, we are seeing directly how it affects our economy. If those ships can't transit through the Red Sea, then they have to reroute around Africa. Our gas mostly comes from Qatar, so that'll affect us here in the UK. 95% of our stuff comes by ship. That would also have to reroute as well. So there's a knock-on consequence. It shows the symbiotic relationship between our security and our economy. The question is, though, why should we do all the heavy lifting? Absolutely, we're part of an international community that should be stepping forward. I'm pleased that we've done so.
But why isn't France? Why isn't Germany? Why isn't Spain? Why isn't Italy?
That is a good question. Sometimes it's capability. It's having the hard power to do so. That doesn't mean to say they're not doing things behind the scenes. There's a number of countries that provided intelligence as to where to actually hit the Houthis. The reason why there's been another spate of attacks, strikes on the Houthi missile systems is because those attacks from the Houthis have continued. Now, if the Houthis stop doing that, and there is access through international waters, then our retaliation will also stop as well.
Well, there's no guarantee that will happen. Given that the Americans, I think, have engaged in other strikes without our help, if there have been multiple strikes from the Americans from ourselves over the past couple of weeks and they haven't stopped, what's the logic that they would stop over the next 2 weeks?
Well, because they're using very advanced missile systems, the Houthis themselves, that mostly come from Iran, and eventually they'll deplete that capability. Also, if you take out the radars and so forth, the other the munition stores and so forth, that will limit what the Houthis can do. The question I raised, if I may, in the Commons today is that this is a complex, war-torn, troubled country that we are the penholder for at the United Nations. My question is, what are we doing, therefore, to help the country as a whole? It was united in 1990, the North and the South. It's been unsettled governance and security-wise ever since. Two-thirds of the population suffer from. Two-thirds of the population are affected by the humanitarian challenges. There's so much more that we should be doing with this forgotten country, and the consequence of this is that the North have risen up in the way that they've done to take advantage of the absence of security, the absence of international support. We should turn this chaos into an opportunity to lean back in to help the people of Yemen.
Sarah Champion, Keir Starmer has been full square behind the government on this, but there are some sceptical voices saying, well, this could widen out into a much bigger dispute. And do you think this military action is actually going to work?
I'm a rose between two thorns, and I agree with both positions that you're taking, and I want to merge them together. So first of all, to Jeff, I think Jeff is giving a bit too much credit and intelligence to the Houthis, and I think that they're doing a great PR game, that they're doing this for all these moral high reasons. I think it is indiscriminate. I think it does require an international response, and I absolutely think that we, and by we I mean the UK, but I do mean more broader than that internationally, need to respond to this. I would have much rather it would have been I think there's about 13 countries that sort of came together for this maritime grouping. I wish it had been all of us going in, and I wish I knew what the long-term goal was and what the exit strategy was. But to go to sort of the 2 points that you were making...
the long-term goal is to destroy the Houthis' capabilities.
Well, you can destroy the Houthis' capabilities, but then the Houthis are still there and they're still funded by Iran. So what is that actually achieving? What concerns me, and this is where I'd like to bring both of your points together...
I wasn't aware I'd taken a position.
Yes, you have. You were talking about it being sort of escalating into a wider position and being a concern, and I am concerned by that. And what I would like to say is the Houthis came in 2015 and now control the north of Yemen. Since that time, the humanitarian situation has been described by the UN as the worst in the world. It remains so. And when I go back to Jeff's point about it being indiscriminate, a lot of the ships are also bringing food and medicine to the Yemeni people. 90% of their food and medicine is being imported, and their own people are now suffering under the Houthis. These are not people that are working with a clear strategy. These are, to be honest, terrorists.
And McElvoy.
I was in north of Yemen just in 1980, late 1980s, and just before it all started falling apart, it was artificially held together by this division between...
So you caused it?
Most of the places I went, something dramatic happened. As you know, Iain, I went to East Germany in 1989, and look what happened then. Then I went
where are you going next?
Yeah.
Could we not?
Then I was stationed in the former Soviet Union, so, everybody buckle up tonight. More seriously, that just reminded me, and actually what Sarah was reflecting on there, that I had friends there, and a lot of them were involved in primary healthcare projects, often a lot of things that were funded by international development in absolutely very, very basic conditions, and so open to any disruption was going to be very, very difficult for them. They were just beginning to try and build up health services and education. And I think in dread of those babies that I saw being born then, and small children in Yemen, and it's an extraordinarily beautiful country. And, what has happened to them, that north of Yemen is now in the hands of the Houthis. So I think it is true that we have to act. I did actually ask the Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, last week. I didn't know about the latest round of airstrikes, but we all knew they were coming. It is a slight oddity to have Britain lean so far forward when the country really should be alongside is France. France does have the capacity to deal with this, and this is where we're in a position now. Well, it just has military capability that Germany doesn't. Germany just doesn't have any military capability. Sorry, but it doesn't. What it has is already occupied in the forward presence in the Baltic states.
So why do you think France isn't in?
But I was going to come on to that, and I think what is happening, and this will be more apparent if taking out this Houthi capability does not work as efficiently or effectively or as fast as perhaps Tobias was suggesting that it should or could. I don't know which you were saying, but I understand your point. If you can sort of knock it out, then that's fine. But if it does go on, or if the resupply from the Iranians turns out to be better than we think, we will need to sort of think about widening the alliance. And I think France's position, as I understand it, in high diplomacy, is that it would rather stay out of this and be able to deal with Gaza, Israel, if you like, with sort of clean hands. And in the end, it's Macron at the moment with a difficult political situation, difficult kind of Middle East entanglements for France, would rather sort of play his own game. The trouble is he's also done that a bit on Ukraine and Russia. So you see countries who should be acting together, sort of picking and choosing. I don't regret that Britain has gone in alongside, but I can perfectly understand why voters and even those who are supportive of British military activity, let alone those who aren't. So you've got to ask again, where is this going to go for us?
You were talking to David Cameron on your Power Play podcast from Davos.
Guilty as charged.
No disasters in Davos, though.
Sorry, no?
No disasters in Davos.
No disasters in Davos, but yes, that was
John
on
Stevens,
the Power Play
as
podcast.
political editor of the Daily Mirror, you haven't been slumming it in Davos, have you?
I've definitely not been slumming it in Davos, no. No, sadly I've been here.
So what's your answer to Jeff's question, which let me just repeat because it seems a long time ago he asked it. Do you think there should be a more visible international response to the Houthis?
So I think Jeff's right. I think it would be good if other countries were alongside us. I realise that some countries are part of the coalition, and as Tobias said, they may be providing intelligence or other resources into that action. But I think for us as a country, I don't really see we have much alternative but to take this action. And it does feel remote. It does feel like it's far away from us. But we know with Ukraine war that at the start we just felt, well, that's Putin doing something over here to Ukraine, and how do you even pronounce the capital of this city? And then we quickly saw how it did have an impact on real people when we started to see people's gas bills going up. And you saw the impact that had on the economy. Suddenly firms were finding it hard to pay for stuff. And it has a massive knock-on effect. And the next thing you know, your job's at risk. And so I think for us as a country, it's a good thing that we stepped up to the plate. It's a good thing that we are protecting that shipping lane. And you may think, my job has got nothing to do with whether cargo ships can make its way through the Red Sea. But if they aren't able to do that, if suddenly companies see their costs rising, then there is a real possibility that our economy will be at risk, and it won't be long before firms are having to cut back. Maybe they're cutting back on advertising and suddenly they don't have the money to give to LBC and your job's at risk. Maybe,
Thanks for that. You really cheered me up now.
All parts of the economy, all parts of the economy will be impacted if this does carry on.
And they could then get Anne to come and present this programme because she's cheaper than me.
Yeah.
You think? Oh yeah, gender pay gap. That's why.
What she said.
What have I started? Tobias, quickly.
Yeah, I think there's a bigger picture issue here as well, which is that the world is getting more contested, more fragmented, and over the last couple of decades, we've been perhaps a bit risk-averse to stand up to defend our international rules-based order. And we're now seeing that being exploited by a number of nations, not least China, Russia, and indeed Iran. And I think this is a wake-up call that our world is changing fast, and we've got some tough questions to answer if we don't want to see our world splinter into two spheres of competing influence.
Well, we've got a tough question to answer next. But first, it's 8:17.
This is LBC.
We have with us Anne McElvoy, who is the presenter of the wonderful Power Play podcast, which I have listened to.
Thank you.
So,
as a podcaster, you're always hugely relieved.
Well, there's so many political podcasts now, aren't there?
Too many.
You know, just do the quality test, guys. I mean,
I don't. There's too many on the... No, yeah, I don't make one. I don't listen to them.
This is different.
Well, you see, some of us have been doing a political podcast for 6 years. But we've got these newcomers now, George Osborne and Ed Balls, which is their podcast is actually very good. Sarah Champion is here, Labour MP for Rotherham, Chair of the International Development Select Committee. Tobias Ellwood, Conservative MP for Bournemouth East, and John Stevens, Political Editor of the Daily Mirror. Right, we've got a sort of slight follow-up to the last question from Shahid in Hemel Hempstead. Hello, Shahid.
Yeah, hello everyone. My question is that today Rishi Sunak, he seemed to be saying that anyone that disagrees with his position on why the Houthis were attacked is guilty of glorifying terrorism. And then he added that the government will take a zero-tolerance approach to that. Keir Starmer seemed to agree, and you might remember Suella Braverman as Home Secretary calling those people protesting for ceasefires hate marchers or words to that effect. I also heard one Tory backbencher say about protesters that they're protesting or they're against British values in the Middle East, be it Israel, Palestine, the Houthis. Isn't the political establishment acting like dictators and basically saying to the public, you're not allowed to disagree with us?
John Stevens.
Well, I don't agree with that. I mean, I didn't catch Rishi Sunak's comments in the Commons earlier, but I'm pretty sure that those possibly were not what he was saying. I think that when we took the first action, though it happened, I think it was a Thursday evening, there wasn't time for a vote on it, the government said, and you could understand why they wouldn't want a discussion in Parliament before taking such action. And then the second time round, last night, I think that the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, and the Speaker were told as the attacks were already taking place. I think people can understand, obviously the Labour Party back them, they see them as the right thing to do. I think that if this carries on and is a sustained campaign, then I think there probably is more of a role for Parliament to play in this. And I think it would be possibly quite helpful for people like Shahid to see that MPs are having a proper
Well, there's going to be a debate in the Commons next week, I think.
Right, but that's fine, that's possible. But I think that if we are going further down the line, then we do need a proper discussion on where are we going with this. It's meant to be a deterrent. We obviously don't want to make it a provocation. We want it to be a deterrent. But we look so far, after the first strikes, we didn't see the Houthi rebels stop doing these strikes on civilian vessels in the Red Sea. And so I think that we do need a proper debate. I think it's the right action. I think it's good that we're taking it for all the reasons we said just now, for people's jobs and for the right thing. But I think it would be good if Parliament was having a proper conversation about it.
I have a certain sympathy with the sense behind Shahid's question. I don't think that the government is being dictatorial in the sense that I think some of these things are just happening so fast. And it's interesting, Keir Starmer had to change his position from he would always convene a debate, because I think there's a bit of a fantasy world about conflict. We said, hang on a minute, we'll just stop the airstrikes until we can get day night. So I do think that's, that is something governments sometimes have to act. Where I have a bit more sympathy is this idea that lots of people, I mean, you can probably tell I'm quite robust about this, and I'm quite pleased for these airstrikes to be going ahead. I think they are necessary. But I do understand that not everybody has my point of view. And I worry a bit about people being sort of associated with being apologists for terrorism. By the way, I think the Houthis are as near as damn it to a terrorist organisation. I think they're oppressive to their own people and dangerous beyond. But it is okay to analyse things differently. And I think as long as that's not being used as a pretext by bad actors here domestically to inflame tensions between communities and frankly to put the name on it, to the Muslim community to once again find itself being used as a tool by those who want to use them as weapons. All of those things need to be very rigorously looked at. But I don't instinctively warm to saying that people who have a view that I think is wrong or therefore are apologists for terror. Okay. It worries me a bit as a
Sarah Champion.
liberal.
I think Shahid, I don't know, so apologies for putting words in your mouth. I think he's talking about sort of the broader right to protest and the lack of sort of political engagement with that sort of broader position that some people may take. And I've got quite a lot of sympathy with that. I mean, on the specifics around the interventions on the Red Sea, I don't think that Parliament has to have a debate on every single action a Prime Minister takes, particularly when it's in a conflict situation where you need to act quickly. However, I think the action was taken on a Thursday, and from Monday through Wednesday, we could have had a general debate about the position of what was happening in the Red Sea, just a vox pop, so that Parliament had a say, our constituents had their voices represented, and then, ultimately, the PM is paid to make that decision, so he goes away and makes that decision. And I think when you don't have that level of engagement at all, then some of the cynicism around, I will use Shahid's expression of political dictators, comes up. What I'd also like to do a little bit broader is my committee did a report into atrocity prevention, and that starts with hate speech. That starts with government policies reinforcing or not stopping the hate speech. It starts with media escalating that whole debate, and then it leads to some pretty grotesque things. What I've seen when you look on social media is we very rapidly now get into that polarised position, and some of the language that people are using is really inflammatory and offensive. And I just wish that we could go back to having a robust debate rather than hating each other.
I think that's a really interesting thing to say, because I remember on that Thursday night we covered it between 9 and 10. It hadn't started then.
I came on your show.
You did come on my show. You're absolutely right. And I remember the calls that evening. I was slightly horrified by sort of people attributing motives to people that just weren't right, and just assuming that, well, Britain's an insignificant country, we shouldn't get involved in this sort of thing. And I remember sort of going home that night being slightly depressed by that conversation, Tobias. Not the one I had with you, obviously.
No, there are thanks to it. There are. I wonder where I'm invited back, in fact. But there are consequences for not doing something, for not stepping forward. And if we don't, who will? I mean, that's the fundamental question about what we've been talking about in the Red Sea. I do support the Prime Minister, any Prime Minister's right. The protocol stands that they can prosecute kinetic, a limited response, supported particularly by UN Security Council resolution in this case. The attacks took place, as you touched on the 11th, evening of the 11th of January. The first opportunity to have a wider debate was the Monday, and there was general support for the Prime Minister.
But I meant the Monday before.
Actions.
So we had the debate the following Monday. What I mean is, as things began to escalate, we could have had a statement.
So if I put my old military hat on, you'd be then warning the Houthis.
No, Sarah's debate wouldn't have been directly on military action. It would have been a sort of more general debate on the Houthis.
Exactly.
Yes, certainly you could have done that, but hindsight is helpful. Ultimately, if you want to be able to take out the military capability that the Houthis are using to hit the ships, then you need to do that with the element of surprise. If you do announce, you're actually potentially putting your own troops in danger when they conduct their missions. On the wider point, I think we're all in agreement. Our ability to disagree is eroding, and I've seen it over now two decades in Parliament. Discussions and arguments are always going to be more nuanced. You take the situation in Gaza as well. I absolutely stand by the right of Israel to defend itself and to try and attempt to eliminate Hamas. But I also I'm critical of its utility of its military might in its tactical and operations, which I still today don't understand the strategic objectives. Likewise, if I may finish, on the Gaza side, I absolutely support the Gazan people and what they're going through, but I wish they would distance themselves from Hamas, who are amongst their numbers that are, I'm afraid, not representing in the long term what the people of Gaza, I believe, wish to be pursuing.
And I think that's the problem. You can't have nuanced debates anymore.
No, it's very polarised, as you said.
You can't support two seemingly opposing positions. No. And one of the things that really brought this to the fore for me was I've been calling for a ceasefire, and I innately meant both sides, and people have been attacking me, saying, well, you can't expect Hamas to have a ceasefire without Israel, and it's like, or Israel without Hamas, and it's like, no, it's ceasefire, I meant both sides. So now I'm saying a bilateral ceasefire, and it's like people are looking for an enemy or to trip you up or that.
But not on this programme, Sarah. We do nuance very well on this. I like to think, most of the time anyway. Right, we'll take more of your questions in a moment. It's 8:30 on LBC. Time for the news headlines with Charlotte Morgan.
British and American aid workers are being told to leave Yemen by Houthi authorities. It follows last night's fresh airstrikes targeting the Iranian-backed group over ongoing attacks on shipping in the Red Sea. A police watchdogs revealed details of an emergency call made by a man just an hour before he, a woman and 2 children were found dead in a house in Norwich. The IOPC says he expressed concerns about his own mental health and was told to get medical help. And a former Prime Minister of Israel has told LBC the country can win the war against Hamas once a new government is installed. Ehud Barak is calling for Benjamin Netanyahu to resign. LBC weather. Rain clearing in the southeast, blustery showers in the northwest with lows of 5. Cloud with showers in Scotland tomorrow, mostly bright elsewhere with some patchy rain in the south, a high of 12.
This is LBC.
And McElvoy, Sarah Champion, Tobias Ellwood and John Stevens with us taking your calls, 0345 6060 973. Now, some interesting breaking news here. Turkey's parliament has voted to drop its opposition to Sweden joining NATO after Turkey had opposed Stockholm's accession into the bloc for months. Hungary is now the last remaining NATO member still opposed to Sweden joining. Anybody got any quick comments on that before we move on?
Significant. It had been a massive diplomatic pressure on Turkey to go along with this. It was a bit of a holdout and usually manages to shake down other governments to get something in return. But of course, the fact the Turkish Parliament has rubber stamped this means that basically President Erdogan has sort of said, here's the stamp. Here it is. Please do this. I think it is significant. There are a few good things that come out of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, but one of them is that NATO has been bolstered exhausted by this, and there's a much more pragmatic view that NATO is really going to have to beef up both financially and capability, and simply in the numbers of people who countries I should say, who associate with it. So to have Turkey drop that resistance, get Sweden through, as you say, it leaves the holdout of Hungary in. I think that might be harder to break down. Orban has put himself firmly into Putin's sphere, but no, it's an unusual good win for the right side tonight on that one, I would say.
But of course, if Donald Trump becomes president of the United States, it's could all be very different for
but that's
NATO.
why it's important that it goes through before this big election year, and exactly before Donald Trump gets the chance, if he does, to change that.
We have a question from Shazia in Leeds, who says, seeing as no one else is able to, can Biden beat Trump again? Of course, today voters are voting in New Hampshire. Nikki Haley is the only remaining candidate who has a hope of beating Donald Trump. But if Donald Trump wins this by a good margin, I mean, he's effectively the nominee, and there won't be any more primaries, which is very boring in a way, because they're always very exciting. Sarah Champion.
I'd like him to, but I think it's a tough ask, to be honest. I mean, the Trump machine is pretty all-encompassing, loud. It's got full stage now. I mean, I like that Nikki is still in the fight, but how much longer she will be, I don't know. So then I guess it becomes Biden and Trump slugging it out, and I think it will literally be last man standing. I don't know how this is going to play out.
Given Joe Biden's propensity to fall over.
Well, I could have made a cheap,
but you left it to me.
But I just opened the door. No, but I think Trump's pretty unstoppable, and I say that with great pain. And I worry because we have a world that's very unstable at the moment. So to have a president who, from his last term, was, quite vocal and opinionated on many different topics, I just hope he steps up and gives us the stability that we need.
Tobias.
Yeah, I mean, as we just touched on, the world's getting more dangerous, not less, more fragmented, more contested, and you want international statecraft. Will Trump provide that? That's a big question. The world's superpower, the leader of the West, this is a critical time. I spoke about us becoming too risk-averse over the last couple of decades. That's being exploited by our competitors. And my worry is that Trump will take America down a familiar route of greater isolationism. This is what he did, retreating from the international stage at such a critical
Well, he didn't really do that last time, did he? I mean, sort of all the overtures to North Korea, the Abraham Accords. I mean, there's plenty of examples of him not doing that in his first term.
The Abraham Accords were welcome and so forth, but ultimately what we were just talking about NATO, about the threat to remove itself from NATO, but ultimately his willingness to understand, to reach out, to work, removing himself from the Paris Agreement, for example, on climate change. There are some significant challenges that the world faces that you require America to participate with. And I think some of it is rhetoric, some of it is a lot of the noise, but certainly his focus will be on tackling China. There's a real concern that he will look at Ukraine and say, nothing to do with us, that's a European matter, over to you. And that will have significant consequences for the geopolitics of Europe and indeed our security as well. I think behind the scenes, the strength of relationship we have diplomatically, militarily, on the battlefield and on the factory floor, that will continue. The back channels will remain. But ultimately, we mustn't forget that America, throughout history, has been quite isolationist. And this is not the right time to do that when the world order is being challenged in the way it is at the moment.
And McElvoy.
So I think you're right.
I keep pronouncing your name wrong, don't I? It's
McElvoy. Just go more Scottish. Have a quick whiskey and go Scottish. I think you're right to say there were certain things that didn't happen under Trump. One, that some people said he was going to be completely isolated. He wasn't. Abraham Accords in North Korea. What's the clue here? Neither of them were in Europe. And I think it's the European engagement and when that is going to be missing. And in fact, Trump says so. He said so to von der Leyen, actually, at a meeting a couple of years ago, which he said that if you have problems with put under the kind of banner of if you get problems and get invaded, we won't come and help you. Can you? And he said, we'll ask for our money back on the way out, which I have to say I found quite amusing, given I do think the Europeans have been absolutely to blame. A lot of continental Europe simply has not paid its defence dues, and they're being caught out. Now, I say that with no pleasure because it doesn't help in the situation we're in, but you can understand why there is a body of opinion. It's not, I think, Tobias, as being isolationist. I think for times in its history, America's been isolationist. A lot of times it hasn't been, but a lot of times it's also asked Europe to pay its way, and Europe hasn't. And that's pretty much been the last 30 years. And this has now come home to roost. I'm not convinced that Trump will be the next president. He'll certainly be the nominee. We can forget anything else. I'm not sure how it plays out. There's still the courts to come to their view. I think there will also be a moment and a guest, not to mention it again, on my podcast, I said it last week, Anthony Scaramucci, who was with Trump, as you will all maybe remember, as very briefly as his communications director, but knows him well, the Mooch. Also a great finance man and a bit.
I used to consider him to be a really good guest get, less so nowadays.
Yeah. I find him great because I disagree with that, because what he said was, and this was interesting, that he would functionally go Biden. There are Republicans who, you would say, are quite, loudmouth Republicans, not to put it impolitely. He said, no, I will not become a Democrat. I am a Republican, but I cannot just stand by. And he said, and another thing that will happen is there will be a way of, oh my goodness, Trump again, it's all so exciting. He said, and then it will turn sickly, there will be an overload of it. And so a lot of swing voters will perhaps not be convinced by Biden, but they will at least start to think, I'm really not sure about getting over the edge. I'm not sure about that, but I thought it was an interesting argument from someone who used to work for Donald Trump.
Can I just point out that you made an elementary mistake in that answer?
Oh, sure.
Where instead of, you said on my podcast, whereas what you should have said was on my Power Play podcast.
Thank you, Iain. Let's just take that again.
John Stevens.
I think that, I agree with most of what the panel have said. I think that last time in the election, Joe Biden was almost helped by COVID. Remember that it was middle of 2020. He was
doing it from his basement, wasn't he?
Exactly. He was able to fight most of the campaign from his basement, which kind of covered up some of his foibles and some of the ways that he would have struggled in an election campaign. Also, remember, we are now 4 years in the future, and so he's obviously older than he was then. Did we even have the TV leadership debates last time?
Yes.
We did. But, I mean, he wasn't having to do this gruelling schedule when he was all around the country. I think that is really difficult.
I've started stepping up my election campaign. There will be a general election at some point, I'm sure. And just the difference of being 4 years older, you feel it. And I'm 54. I'm not like 80.
Wait till you're 60.
Yeah, no, but literally these are older men, and it's really, really tough.
Well, I'm going to nick that argument, John Stevens, in future, because I think it's a brilliant one.
Can I just add, first I should declare an interest. I was born in New York. I have an American passport, and therefore...
So you can vote?
I can vote.
Can you?
I don't, because my role in British politics, but absolutely, I
But if you did?
Well, I'm not going to. I don't think it's right for me to say. It's for the American people to make their judgment. Should have made that very, 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 very clear. The point I think I was touching on is the floating voter, or those middle voters, and I worry about American democracy and indeed Western democracy, where it's going with the polarization, the popularization, if you like, of a populist angle. The bell curve normally is left, right, and then it's the centre that is the sweet spot. That's the ground. The floating voter, you get those, and you're going into government. You go to your extreme, like Jeremy Corbyn, you're not going to get yourself elected. In America, it's reversed.
Yeah.
In America, it's reversed. You've now got, because of the media and that spoon feeds what you want to hear, it's actually an upside down bell curve. It's turned into a U, where you've got extremes. That's where your votes are, and it's whoever has the biggest, pack of votes on either side that's actually going to win. And that is the concern I have. What illustration, what exemplar is America then doing for the rest of the West and so forth, and indeed the world, in saying this is what democracy should look like? This is why so many states around the world, countries around the world, are actually saying, perhaps I'll tip a little bit more to an authoritarian model, and they're lured by China through various programs and so forth. And that's why I touch on the world potentially splintering, with the global south watching very carefully as to where the world's going.
OK. It's 8:45 on LBC.
LBC.
I've just told our panel what the fun question at the end is so they can prepare their hilarious answers. They're either going to be very hilarious or it's not going to work.
Good.
If you've just tuned in, Anne McElvoy is here, Sarah Champion, Tobias Ellwood and John Stevens. Let's go to Munesh in Southall. Hello, Munesh.
Hello, good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel.
Hi.
Hello.
A quick question to you. Is it fair and wise that we should have one young girl from a particular faith challenging one of our top teachers, headmistresses of the country, which has actually transformed one of the worst schools into one of the best schools in the country, outperforming the private schools, just because she wants to have her right to prayer in a particular way, in a particular time, when she wants to do it her way? And more importantly, should legal aid be applied in this situation when someone who's losing their home because they haven't paid their council tax, where's their right of human rights to lose their home? They don't get a chance to do that. That's my question to you, panel.
Thank you very much, Munesh. Now, the background to this, the High Court has heard a legal challenge launched by a Muslim teenage girl who says the ban on prayer rituals on school premises, which was imposed by the Michaela Community School in Wembley, breaches her human rights. The head teacher, Catherine Birbelsing, says her staff have been threatened and suffered racist abuse over the policy. The judge is expected to deliver a ruling on this case next month, and as Munesh said, the pupil has received legal aid from the taxpayer. That is madness, Anne McElvoy, isn't it?
There's quite a lot in this story. Catherine Birbelsing does indeed run a very successful school, and she is an extremely inspiring teacher. She's also quite a divisive character. She has very strong views. She's very lively in the public debate. She's largely on the right of that argument, and there's nothing at all wrong with that. I think where it gets a bit muddled up is whether someone... pupil in this case can say that in an environment in which it is actually a faith-free environment, it's not a faith school, there you could have an argument about whether, if a pupil wants to pray in a certain way, is it compliant with the rules or the organisational in Catholicism, it would be the diocese or whoever whoever is like the partner of the school in the faith. In this case, I think she probably is within her rights to say she understands it is divisive, and the manner in which this case was launched was intended to cause more problems than it was going to resolve, as well as being a faith issue. However, if you've got a Human Rights Act that says you are able to exercise your freedoms of religion, it seems to me right that it is heard in the High Court. So I kind of know that I come down against, I'm sort of on Catherine Birbelsing's side here, but I have no problem with it being heard in the High Court, and if it takes legal aid to get it there, I think it's more clarifying than the caller simply saying, well, this is outrageous. Sorry, Sarah, but I think that was a bit the suggestion, that actually you're going to have to come to some view on this, and it's better to have the courts involved. If it takes legal aid to get there, I don't especially have a
Isn't it quite simple? If you have a problem about not being able to pray at school, go to a different school.
Well, that may be, but if you're going to say that when you have a lot of faith communities who feel that they're not heard and where resentments grow, and if you've got a problem with that, mate, why don't you just? I mean, I'm not sure that would be the right. I would rather go through this case. I would look at it quite rigorously, and I would either uphold the school's right to say this is not a faith school of that faith or any other, and so you're not going to pray here. If you want to pray, go to a faith school. I think that seems to me a more sensible way to take it than perhaps getting a bit hot under the collar and various buttons are being pressed about legal aid, about Catherine Birbelsing, or about the fact that it's a Muslim pupil. So I'm trying, and I'm not sure I'm convincing you in, to come up with something that would work in more circumstances than this one and would look equitable.
You're quite right. You're not convincing me.
There you go.
Sarah?
I don't know the case. What I immediately think, and if this came to me as casework, is there's a lot more going on, and why has it got to this point without being resolved? One would have hoped that some conversations and accommodation could have been had before it gets to legal action. What I would say is I fundamentally believe as a country we are fair, and we're also pretty tolerant. And my gut feeling to this is it fair? Is it proportionate? Is it impacting on others' rights to learn, or does it require additional teacher support or additional room? And I'm always immediately nervous when someone are calling on their human rights, because human rights, we do have an act, and they're pretty basic and transparent. And I would like to see more evidence to see if the human rights are actually being breached on this.
John Stevens.
I think it feels like that we increasingly jump straight to the court button, whether that is interest groups are willing to fund cases, whether it's people able to crowdfund them online. We know...
This is us that's paying for this.
No, I know, exactly. But I feel in general, in the last few years, maybe it's just because it's been much more public and we've had high-profile things where people have been able to crowdfund for different legal cases. But I think there is a general feeling that now, rather than deal with these issues in a sensible way, as Sarah says, between the pupil and the school, that we go straight to the court and then it gets even more divisive and then you get this high-profile case, rather than maybe there was a better way to sort this out.
Tobias.
It is difficult. I mean, if we haven't debated in Parliament, we probably wouldn't be allowed to talk about it because it is a live case. It's still, I think, going through courts as well.
So it's a civil case.
I don't know the circumstances as to whether this was a change in the school's approach, because there are schools in Bournemouth, for example. St. Peter's is a Catholic school, and you know that when you put your child applies there. Bishop of Winchester, is a Church of England school, and then you've got co-ed schools, you've got non-denomination schools, and so forth. You make your choice as a parent as to where you want to go, and therefore, if it's clear-cut as to what the rules are, what the head teacher is trying to do and establish in whatever environment it actually is, then I would support absolutely the teacher to be able to do so. I'm very sorry that this is another example of the eroding ability to disagree, to be able to resolve these matters in an amicable way. It becomes very polarised, very passionate, and then it spills out. And that, unfortunately, makes resolving the matter all the more difficult for the community, for the teacher, and, of course, for the school.
Munesh, thank you. Very good question. Let's go to Peter in Lincoln. Now, I'm looking at the clock here. We've probably got time for 1 minute from each of you on a very complicated subject. Peter says, is the death of Britain's steel industry and the loss of the jobs in it an inevitability? Can we have a steel industry in a green world? Now, 2,800 jobs are set to be lost when Tata Steel closes its 2 blast furnaces in Port Talbot in South Wales as the company transitions towards becoming net zero. John?
I think that we can. I think that it is quite possible to invest in green technology and green jobs in the UK. I think that a lot of people, particularly those workers at Port Talbot, are asking, we're putting £500 million in here, but yet on the other side we're getting 2,800 job losses. Is there a way that the government could have put in this investment and got some reassurances that there would be fewer job losses?
I'm afraid I think it's both because of the green commitments, and not only the ones we can argue about when do you do net zero, but broadly speaking, that sort of change around it in terms of the way the global economy works, the scale, the size of steel, the fact that it is such a globalised industry, the competitive factors. I think it is a to-be-built-down industry in the UK, and that the really interesting point and the pressure point for this government, or possibly Labour if it gets in, is how many jobs does it want to support over what period of time, or when does it ask people to transition out of this? And then effectively, and I grew up in a near the steel town of Consett, so there's still it does of course tug the heartstrings, but I always worry about workforces not being prepared for things that I think are inevitable. I'm afraid I think this is
this entirely down to the green transition, this closure, do you think?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I wouldn't set myself up as an expert on the reasons behind it, but I just know we've had problems on 2 fronts. One is the green transition, the other is simply price and competition, and that there is a sense that steel industries had to be propped up, and sometimes Port Talbot is in the eye of the storm. Now it was also Redcar and Consett, my part of the world, in the northeast previously. But I see a longer trend here. But I would be actually quite happy to hear from around the Tobias. Sarah's got her Britain Steel badge on, so maybe she's going to be a bit more optimistic than I am.
I am optimistic. I'm a steel town MP.
My grandfather worked at Consett Steelworks.
Is it though?
Sarah?
Yeah, I'm a steel town MP. We make green steel, we make speciality steel, so it's basically all recycling. We have an electric arc furnace. they're incredibly energy intensive. I've been, as long as I've been an MP, trying to get the government to give us a level playing field. I've been trying to get the government to buy British steel because the industry could be profitable and could have a long-term future.
Could it, though? Because people have been saying this for 40 years.
Well, I'll put it another way. It has to be, because we do need virgin steel, which is what they're making at Port Talbot, and we need it particularly in defence.
Well, that's a fair point.
Without that, I get very, very nervous that we're then going to be dependent on Russia and China, who have consistently undercut both in price and quality of our steel. So this government, whether it likes it or not, needs to invest in our industry and needs to put us back on a level playing field. And unless they do, strategically, we're vulnerable.
I suspect you've stolen Tobias's thunder with that argument.
A little bit, but I underline the fact that, absolutely agree, is our resilience, our capability in a fast-changing world, which we've stressed a few times this evening. Are we able to stand up to some of the challenges that we're going to face? If China and Russia wants to cause economic harm, then they can slow down the amount of steel that's coming this way. Any nation can do that if they've got a monopoly over that supply. So security of supply is absolutely critical. It's now part of the integrated review. The idea that we have an indigenous capability in the UK, I very much want to see us hang on to.
Right, our fun question from Ollie in County Antrim. Sarah is really gagging for this one.
You're going to regret that phrase.
A zoo in Lincolnshire has a problem with 8 parrots who keep swearing at visitors, so they're now hoping another 100 birds will just drown the rude ones out. When have you blurted out something rude and had to hope you were drowned out by the crowd? Sarah Champion, the floor is yours.
Right now, I am going to make that error of judgment.
Oh my God.
I am chair of the all-party parliamentary group on zoos and aquariums, and because of that, I get to go to all manner of zoos around the country, which is fabulous and a great honour. Wherever I go, animals are masturbating. And in Chester Zoo, they have, so I told you, and in Chester Zoo, they have resolved the issue because it has become such a problem with their lemurs masturbating that they banished them to an island out of public sight.
Corey's just ended the show.
Can I, in the spirit of Eli Stevenson, hand over yield the mic back to you? Because I think you should continue that story. It's going to trump everybody else's story that we have today. Absolutely amazing. I think you're going to get a lot of listeners dialing in, responding.
Well, I can guarantee that you're going to go viral later, Sarah.
Go to Chester Zoo, free the lemurs.
Seem to be having quite a nice time.
I don't recall any event or such, and I certainly can't compete with what you're speaking about there, and I wouldn't even attempt to do so.
Anne?
I spoke long before Brexit was a thing. Do you remember that thing? The European Monetary Union was basically trying to drag Britain into single currency. I was highly pregnant at the time when I went off to this rather slightly pompous. No, it's the point. And I said, I want to make it very clear, I'm not speaking from the withdrawal position. And there was suddenly a sort of ripple of kind of sniggering as this highly pregnant lady sort of advertised. I didn't know. From the EU, never mind. It is that moment when you feel the words coming out and you're just, no, can I just start again?
John?
I just feel so lame in comparison to Sarah's now, but it was
I think we all
back
do.
before I was in this world when I was slightly younger. I was with my parents in Chipping Norton. We were there for the weekend. It was just quite nice. And we were just wandering along the high street, and David Cameron stepped out of the post office in front of us with his daughter in a onesie.
That was his constituency? Yeah?
It was his constituency, but I wasn't expecting to see him there. I just blurted out a swear word. Just was shocked. I don't know why I was so shocked, because I was in Chipping Norton, and just carried on walking. And my parents, who very much do not swear, I just thought, hopefully they just didn't realise. And then afterwards, my mum was like, I don't usually use language like that. Of course, she has heard me shout out the F word.
Well, I ran a course once for the ports industry called Public Relations in the Ports Industry, and I introduced it for the opening session as Welcome to Public Relations in the Ports Industry. not quite on your level there, Sarah, but thank you very much to all four of you, and witnessing the end of Sarah Champion's political career. It's quite something.
Long ago.
On tomorrow's panel, we have the Guardian columnist and environmental campaigner George Monbiot, the SNP's Women and Equality spokesperson Kirsten Oswald, the Daily Telegraph's parliamentary sketch writer Madeleine Grant, and the Conservative MP Dean Russell. In the next hour, we are going to go back to the subject of the Houthis. And it's a very simple question that I'm going to ask you. We have now been involved in 2 airstrikes against the Houthis, trying to minimise their capabilities to launch more strikes against ships in the Red Sea. Do you support more airstrikes? Do you think it is part of Britain's international role to take part in missions like this? Or can you still not see why we're doing it? Because there seems to be an enormous number of people who just think it's got nothing to do with us. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call here on LBC.